new residents, welcome to UCSD. We're going to be covering pelvic ultrasound. Hope as you watch this video before we all hang out in person, and then when we get together in person, we can do some of these scans with a hands-on approach. So let's talk about pelvic ultrasound. My name is Suk. I am one of your attendings as part of the Division of Ultrasound and Department of the Emergency Medicine. So the goal is to discuss the planes of scanning. And then we're going to do a transabdominal and transvaginal lecture and just to ID some basic structures, and we'll quickly touch upon pregnancy. When you're doing the transabdominal pelvic ultrasound, you want to have the curvilinear probe or the phased array probe. Both of these probes are low frequency probes that have a lot of penetration, right? So because you want to be looking at structures deeper than 6 centimeters. And you want to have your exam type in OB, and you want the bladder to be full because your bladder is your acoustic window that you'll be shooting through. If the bladder is small, you'll have a lot of bowel gas. So big full bladder looking through and trying to see the uterus. So you have the longitudinal view, and essentially what it is, here's a little picture of netters, and we have a sagittal cut here, and your uterus is here, your bladder is right here, right? And then the vagina is right here. And then what you do is you put the probe right over here, cutting partly through the pubic symphysis. And then if this bladder is nice and big, it'll push all the bowel out of the way, and you'll be able to see those structures behind the bladder. And what that will look like is something like this. So their probe is a little bit higher, so you cut the pubic symphysis. Here's the bladder, and deep to that, here's the uterus. And then when you turn short axis, you just turn the probe 90 degrees to the patient's right, and you get a short axis cut through the bladder, looking at the uterus and able to see behind the uterus, just like this. And what you'll see here is something like this, where you have a bladder and a uterus. And this form, if the bladder is big enough, you can try to find ovaries on each side, because they'll kind of be coming off. The ovary comes off here, and ovary comes off here. So here's a quick example of the long axis view through the uterus, through the bladder looking at the uterus, and here's a short axis view. This is from POCUS Atlas, which is one of the websites run by one of our former fellows here. So that's really it for planes of scanning and transabdominal ultrasound, and how you find the bladder, uterus, and how you can try to find the ovaries. Next up is transvaginal. Essentially, this is an endocavitary probe. This is a very high frequency probe, meaning that you want to be looking at structures 6 centimeters or less. So the benefit to that is that because it's 6 centimeters or less, the resolution is a lot better, right? And so you kind of want to set up, you want to put a condom over the probe, you want to have gel, and you want to have it on the patient's right to your left. So if you're right-handed, you're controlling the probe with your right hand, and you're pushing the machine buttons with your left hand. And generally, it follows your pelvic exam. And here, would you want the bladder to be empty or full? Let's think about that for a second. Crickets, 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 and the answer is empty, because you're looking at a more superficial view. If you have a big bladder, it kind of pushes everything far away, and you really can't see things that far. So you want a nice decompressed bladder, and you want the uterus to be pushed up very close to your probe. So imagine if this bladder was big and full, it would push everything far away, and you wouldn't be able to see it. So you want a decompressed bladder here. And so because you're not looking that deep, you can only see this far, because this is a very superficial probe, and it'll look something like this. So you'll be doing an ultrasound through here, and it's kind of tricky because the image is probably more like this, where the probe is here touching the uterus like this, and this way when you go ahead and take your hand and you pull down towards the floor, the probe head goes up towards the ceiling, and you'll see more of the fundus. And if you were to go ahead and take the probe handle and push up to the floor, the probe head would go down, up to the ceiling, and the probe head will go down. You'll see more of the cervix. And there's kind of a live view. Here we're scanning left and right through the uterus. And you can try to find the ovaries going left, going right, just like that, kind of sweeping through the whole uterus. But it's easier to find the ovaries in transverse when you go ahead and rotate that probe 90 degrees. Then you can look right as well as left, and you'll essentially find structure. So here's the uterus. You'll find a structure sitting to the right of it, and that'll be one ovary. And you do the same thing. So that's it for transvaginal. Pretty straightforward. Quickly discussing pregnancy. So when your main goal as an ER physician is to try to categorize this into early pregnancy on ultrasound. So you're looking for either if it's a normal intrauterine pregnancy, no intrauterine pregnancy, or an abnormal intrauterine pregnancy. And so let's see what I have next. Oh, in a normal intrauterine pregnancy, you'll see a gestational sac followed by the double decidual sign, the yolk sac, embryo, cardiac activity, and finally you start actually seeing fetal movement. And so here's kind of what it looks like. Initially, you have a gestational sac with a double decidual sign. You can also get this in ectopic, but when you finally have a yolk sac, that confirms an intrauterine pregnancy. Eventually, you get a fetal pole, and then you actually get a fetus. Let me see if this has a little heartbeat. Well, it's moving, it's got a heartbeat, and it's moving. So an ectopic pregnancy is you can get an empty uterus or just that gestational sac, which we call a pseudo sac. You can get free fluid outside the uterus, right? Or you can see an obvious ectopic somewhere outside the uterus. So let's take a look at this one right here. Here's an empty uterus, and here's an empty uterus. So if this patient came to the emergency room with this uterus right here and this right here, transabdominal and transvaginal, and they had a positive pregnancy test, what should you do next? Well, this could still be an early pregnancy, this could be a spontaneous miscarriage, or this could be an ectopic. So really, depending on what the exam looks like, the patient may need to have a follow-up quant to see which way they're trending. Now, obviously, if the quant was like 15,000, you would expect something, therefore you're more worried about an ectopic. If it's the same patient, but with this ultrasound, well, now you're much more worried because this is definitely not normal, right? Because you have what looks like a bladder here. Here's this kind of complex uterus. There's some stuff back here, and this is free fluid. There's probably some clots going on here. So this free fluid is very, very concerning because this free fluid is not physiologic. It's not just a little bit sitting back here. It's sitting on top of the uterus, and there's probably some complex clots. And so that's basically it when you're doing pelvic ultrasounds, right? You're essentially trying to categorize using your scales of using transabdominal or transvaginal. You're trying to categorize a pregnant patient into either a normal pregnancy, an obvious abnormal pregnancy, and an obvious ectopic. So a normal pregnancy, you're done. The patient has a live intrauterine pregnancy or fetal pole, and you're essentially good. Or if they have nothing, they can still be early or abnormal. And finally, if you see an obvious ectopic, like the last case when you had free fluid, well, then you're also finished, and then you're going to be calling OB. So that's your goal in emergency medicine of using transabdominal and transvaginal ultrasound. All right, I'll see you guys for the next 4 years.